On the first wedding night, the bride entered the bedroom. But instead of joy, she experienced real horror. What she saw in her husband's back turned her life upside down. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching this video from. Emily woke up to the gentle sound of waves crashing against the shore, the golden morning light filtering through the sheer curtains of her hotel suite. The room smelled of fresh flowers and expensive linen, a lingering reminder of the grand celebration that had taken place the night before. Her wedding dress, now a delicate memory of the most important day of her life, hung elegantly on a wooden stand near the bed. The sight of it made her heart flutter with excitement. She stretched slowly, savoring the warmth of the soft sheets before turning to the other side of the bed. Empty. Jason had likely woken up early, ever the early riser, always eager to take on the day. It was one of the things she loved about him. His energy, his confidence, the way he always seemed so sure of everything. A tray of breakfast sat on the small glass table near the window, fresh fruit, toast, and a steaming cup of coffee. A small handwritten note was placed beside it. "Morning, beautiful. I let you sleep in. See you at the beach. Love, Jay." Emily smiled. Jason always had a way of making her feel special, of knowing exactly what she needed without her even saying it. She got out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet, and walked toward the large window. The view was breathtaking. Endless blue ocean, white sand, and a few scattered palm trees swaying in the breeze. The same beach where, in just a few hours, she would say, "I do." The excitement of the day ahead settled into her bones. She had dreamed of this moment for so long. Growing up, she had always imagined her wedding as a grand affair, full of laughter, love, and beauty. Jason had made that dream come true. Everything about their relationship had felt like a whirlwind romance from the very beginning. They had met 2 years ago at a charity gala in New York, where Jason had effortlessly charmed her with his wit and intelligence. He had been different from the other men she had dated. Successful yet humble, mysterious yet open enough to make her feel like she truly knew him. He never talked much about his past, always brushing off questions about his childhood or his early career with the simple, "It's not that interesting." Emily had never pressed him for details. What mattered was the present, the life they were building together. As she sipped her coffee, she thought about how safe she felt with him, how he had always taken care of everything. He had planned the entire wedding, insisting she shouldn't stress over details. He wanted everything to be perfect for her. And it was. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Her best friend, Olivia, peeked inside before stepping in with a wide grin. "Still not dressed? You do know you're getting married in 3 hours, right?" Emily laughed, setting down her coffee. I know. I was just enjoying the view." "Well, enjoy it later. Right now, we need to make you the most beautiful bride ever." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Hair, makeup, final adjustments to the dress. Excited chatter filled the room as her bridesmaids helped her prepare. The moment she stepped into her gown, silence fell. She looked at herself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back. The ivory lace hugged her figure perfectly, the soft train cascading behind her like a dream. A delicate veil rested over her shoulders, framing her face in an ethereal glow. For the first time that morning, a deep sense of reality settled over her. She was about to become Jason's wife. Her father arrived a few minutes later, his eyes misty with emotion as he took her hands. He kissed her forehead gently, whispering, "You're going to be so happy, sweetheart." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. She believed him. She wanted to believe him. The ceremony was nothing short of magical. The beach was transformed into a breathtaking scene. Rows of white chairs facing the ocean, an elegant floral arch framing the altar where Jason stood waiting. The soft breeze carried the scent of fresh roses and orchids mingling with the salty sea air. As Emily walked down the aisle, her heart pounded. Jason's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, it was as if nothing else existed. She had never seen him look at her like that before. There was something intense in his gaze, something almost unreadable, but it melted away the moment he smiled. The vows were spoken with sincerity and love. Jason promised to always protect her, to stand by her side through everything. His voice was steady, certain. She had never felt so sure of anything in her life. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers from their friends and family rang through the air. The first kiss as husband and wife felt like a promise of forever. The reception was just as perfect as the ceremony. A luxurious setup with twinkling lights, a live band, and an endless flow of champagne. Emily danced with Jason under the stars, their laughter blending with the music. Her friends pulled her aside to gush over how lucky she was. "Jason is incredible," they said. "You found the perfect man." She agreed. Everything about him was perfect. But later that night, when they arrived at their private villa for the honeymoon, that perfection would show its first crack. Because when Jason took off his shirt, she saw something she had never seen before. A tattoo. A large, dark symbol inked onto his back. A skull split by a jagged lightning bolt. She froze. That tattoo hadn't been there before. Emily stood frozen in place, her breath caught in her throat. The dim light of the honeymoon suite cast flickering shadows across the room, but the image in front of her was unmistakable. Jason's back was turned to her, and there, covering a large portion of his skin, was the tattoo. A skull, split by a jagged lightning bolt. The ink was deep, bold, and far too fresh-looking for something she could have simply missed before. Her mind raced. She had seen Jason shirtless countless times over the past 2 years. On vacation, at the gym, even at home on lazy Sundays. She would have noticed something like this. There was no way she wouldn't have. Yet there it was. Her fingers curled against the silk fabric of her robe, heart pounding against her ribs. She wanted to say something, to ask him about it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she watched as Jason, completely unaware of her shock, moved casually across the room, retrieving a bottle of champagne from the small bar near the window. His movements were relaxed, as if nothing had changed, as if nothing was out of place. Emily forced herself to breathe, to think rationally. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he had gotten it recently, and just never mentioned it. But why wouldn't he? It was so large, so striking. It wasn't the kind of thing someone just forgot to bring up. A cold sensation settled in her stomach. Jason turned back to her, his blue eyes locking onto hers with the same warm affection they always held. He smiled, holding up the bottle. "Champagne?" She nodded slowly, swallowing back the unease crawling up her spine. He popped the cork, the sound sharp against the quiet of the suite. The golden liquid poured into their glasses, fizzing at the surface. Jason handed her one, then raised his in a silent toast. "To us," he said, his voice smooth, confident. Emily hesitated for just a second before clinking her glass against his. She took a sip, the crisp taste of the champagne doing little to settle the storm in her mind. She needed to ask. She couldn't let this go, but not now, not like this. The night had been perfect, the wedding magical. If she confronted him now, if she let her fear show, it would ruin everything. She forced a smile, letting him pull her into his arms. The warmth of his body against hers should have been comforting, but all she could think about was the ink etched into his skin. That night, she lay awake long after Jason had fallen asleep beside her. She listened to the steady sound of his breathing, staring at the ceiling as questions churned in her mind. How long had he had that tattoo? Why had she never seen it before? Why did it look so new? Morning came too quickly. Emily stirred as Jason pressed a kiss to her forehead, murmuring something about going for a run. She pretended to be half asleep, waiting until the door clicked shut behind him before she sat up abruptly. Her heart pounded as she swung her legs over the side of the bed, her mind made up. She needed answers. The suite was quiet except for the distant hum of the waves outside. Emily reached for her phone on the nightstand, hesitating for only a second before unlocking it. She opened the camera, scrolling back through old photos. She searched for any image that might show his back, any proof that she wasn't losing her mind. Nothing. All the pictures she had were from the front, the side, never his back. Had he hidden it from her? Her pulse quickened as a new idea took root. What if it hadn't been there before? What if he had gotten it recently, in secret? And more importantly, why? Her fingers trembled as she set her phone down. She knew she had to be careful. If Jason had been hiding this from her, then confronting him without any real answers wouldn't help. She needed to understand what the tattoo meant. Her gaze flickered to the nightstand where Jason had left his shirt. Without thinking, she grabbed it, clutching the fabric in her hands. It smelled like him, familiar and comforting, yet suddenly foreign. She turned to her phone again, opening the browser. A quick search of skull with lightning bolt tattoo meaning flooded the screen with images. Most were generic, but as she scrolled, a particular article caught her eye. Her breath hitched. The design was nearly identical to Jason's, and beneath the image the caption read, "Symbol associated with high-profile financial fraud rings, linked to corporate sabotage and embezzlement cases." Emily's hands grew cold. She clicked on the article, scanning the words rapidly. The tattoo had been connected to a group known for infiltrating companies, stripping them of assets, and vanishing without a trace. There were mentions of suspected members, though most had disappeared before authorities could catch them. Some arrests had been made, but no one had ever uncovered the full network. Her throat tightened. Jason worked in finance. He'd always been vague about his career, about the specifics of his deals. What if... The sound of the hotel door unlocking sent a jolt through her body. She quickly closed the browser, locking her phone as Jason stepped inside, towel slung around his shoulders from his run. His skin glistened slightly with sweat, his usual confident smirk in place. "You're up," he said, walking toward her. "I was going to bring back coffee." Emily forced a smile, hoping he couldn't see the fear in her eyes. "Couldn't sleep much," she murmured. Jason leaned down, pressing a kiss to her cheek. "Still getting used to being a married woman?" he teased. She laughed softly, but her mind was racing. What was he really hiding? And had she just married a man who was planning to betray her? Emily moved through the next few hours as if in a daze, her body going through the motions while her mind remained trapped in an endless loop of questions. Jason was as charming and attentive as ever, completely unaware of the turmoil boiling beneath her calm exterior. He suggested a boat tour around the island, then dinner at an exclusive restaurant. His voice was smooth, his touch warm, his presence as magnetic as it had always been. But now, every glance, every word felt like a carefully rehearsed act. She couldn't stop thinking about the tattoo. The discovery from the article had lodged itself into her mind like a splinter, refusing to be ignored. It wasn't just any tattoo. It had meaning, a connection to something bigger, something dangerous. And Jason had hidden it from her. The thought made her stomach twist. For 2 years, she had trusted him. She had fallen in love with him, built a life with him, agreed to marry him, believing he was the man she knew him to be. But now she was starting to wonder if she had ever truly known him at all. By the time evening fell, her plan was forming. She needed answers, but she couldn't ask Jason outright. Not yet. If he was hiding something, if he was connected to whatever this symbol meant, he wouldn't just confess. No, she had to be careful. After dinner, they returned to the suite. Jason relaxed and content, Emily forcing herself to mirror his mood. She laughed at his jokes, let him kiss her, let him pull her into his arms as they lay in bed. But long after he had drifted into sleep, she remained awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic sound of his breathing. The moment she was certain he was deep in sleep, she slipped out of bed. Her movements were slow, careful, silent. Jason had always been a light sleeper, but tonight, exhaustion had pulled him under quickly. She retrieved her phone from the nightstand, padding barefoot across the room to sit in the dim glow of a small table lamp. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the screen and reopened the article from earlier. She scanned the page again, this time paying attention to the details she had skimmed in her initial panic. The article mentioned a financial fraud ring that had operated under several aliases, infiltrating companies, siphoning millions of dollars, and disappearing before law enforcement could catch them. Some members had been arrested, but others had vanished, their identities erased or altered. There was no direct mention of Jason's name. But she knew that didn't mean anything. If he was part of something like this, he wouldn't have left a digital trail. She clicked on a linked source at the bottom of the article, leading her to a case report on the FBI's website. A list of suspected names and associates, many blacked out. One of the few visible names stood out: Jordan Daniels. Her stomach clenched. The initials, J.D. She swallowed hard, her gaze flickering toward the bed where Jason slept, his chest rising and falling steadily. Could it be him? Could Jason be Jordan Daniels? She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to think. It wasn't proof, just a coincidence. But coincidences were piling up too quickly. She scrolled further down the report, her heart hammering as she found a grainy surveillance image. A man exiting a corporate building, captured from behind. He was wearing a suit, the angle of his head just enough to show a partial profile. It wasn't clear. But something about the way he carried himself, the posture, the stride, sent a chill through her. Jason had that same walk. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. She had to find out more. Her eyes flicked to Jason's suitcase near the closet. Her fingers curled around her phone tighter as an idea took shape in her mind. If he had changed his identity, there had to be something, documents, anything, that could confirm her suspicions. She stood slowly, every step calculated as she approached the suitcase. Kneeling beside it, she carefully unzipped the front pocket first, her fingers brushing against the smooth lining. Empty. She moved to the main compartment, hesitating only for a moment before pulling it open. Clothes were neatly folded, toiletries packed meticulously, nothing unusual at first glance. But then her fingers brushed against something solid at the bottom, tucked beneath a layer of clothing. Her breath caught as she pulled it free. A second passport. Her hands trembled as she flipped it open. The name was different. The photo was Jason's, or Jordan Daniels. A cold, sinking feeling settled in her chest. She closed the passport quickly, stuffing it back where she found it, her breathing shaky. She had her answer. Jason wasn't who he said he was. A wave of nausea hit her as she realized the implications. She had married a man who had lied about his identity, a man who could be involved in something criminal, a man who had planned every step of their life together under false pretenses. And worst of all, she had no idea what his real intentions were. Emily forced herself to move, closing the suitcase as carefully as she had opened it. She needed time to think. She crawled back into bed, her heart racing, her mind spinning. She lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling Jason's warmth beside her, but knowing now that it was all a lie. She had to get out. But she couldn't let him know she knew. She had to be careful. Because if Jason had spent years perfecting a life built on deception, there was no telling what he would do to protect it. Emily barely slept. Her mind spun in an endless loop, replaying every moment she had spent with Jason, searching for the signs she had missed. She had been so blinded by love, by the security he had offered, that she had ignored the gaps in his past, the deflections in conversation, the way he had always controlled the narrative of their relationship. Now, as she lay still in the dark, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath beside her, she realized just how little she had truly known the man she married. Morning arrived too soon. The soft, golden light of the island sun filtered through the curtains, casting a deceptive warmth over the room. Jason stirred beside her, stretching with a contented sigh before pressing a kiss against her temple. She forced herself to stay relaxed, to smile when he murmured a sleepy, "Good morning," against her skin. She couldn't let him suspect anything. She was trapped. Her heart pounded as she turned toward him, watching as he reached for his phone, scrolling absent-mindedly through messages. She wondered what kind of business he was attending to, what kinds of secrets he was managing, all while playing the part of the devoted husband. The memory of the second passport burned in her mind. He wasn't Jason Davis. He was Jordan Daniels. And now she knew for certain that she was married to a lie. She needed a plan. Jason rose from the bed, stretching before heading toward the shower. The sound of running water filled the suite, masking the rapid beating of her heart as she reached for her own phone. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the screen, opening her contacts. Who could she call? Who would believe her? She thought of Olivia, of her father, of the attorneys she had worked with in the past. But what would she even say? That she had just discovered her husband was a fraud, possibly a criminal. That she had been fooled, and now she wasn't sure what he was capable of. She set the phone down, exhaling shakily. She needed proof. Real proof. Sliding out of bed, she moved quietly across the room, her eyes darting toward Jason's suitcase. She knew she couldn't risk checking it again so soon, but there had to be more. Something else. Something that would tell her exactly what she was dealing with. Her gaze landed on his laptop. It sat on the desk near the window, closed but not locked away. Jason was careful, but he had never acted suspicious enough to make her think he would password protect basic files. If he had used this laptop for work, for whatever his real job was, there had to be something on it. She hesitated, listening to the sound of the shower, mentally calculating how much time she had. Jason took his time in the mornings, always meticulous with his routine. 5 minutes, maybe 10 if she was lucky. Heart hammering, she moved quickly, flipping open the laptop and pressing the power button. The screen lit up, asking for a password. Her stomach dropped. Of course, he wouldn't leave it unprotected. But she knew Jason. She knew how he thought. He was strategic, but he was also a man of routine. If he had set a password, it was something he needed to remember easily. She typed in his birthday. Incorrect. She tried her own birthday. Nothing. The anniversary of the day they met. Still wrong. Panic crept into her chest as she heard the water shut off. She only had seconds left. Desperate, she typed in the name of his college, the one he had claimed to attend. The screen unlocked. Her breath caught. A wave of dread settled over her as she stared at the home screen, littered with folders, emails, and financial statements. This was it. This was what she needed. Her fingers moved quickly, opening one of the folders labeled Contracts. The documents inside were encrypted, their names vague, but one file stood out, an email chain with an attachment labeled Final Transfer Report. She clicked on it. The screen filled with rows of numbers, bank accounts, transactions, offshore holdings. The amounts were staggering. Millions of dollars moved between anonymous accounts, all connected to a corporation she had never heard of. She barely had time to register the weight of what she was seeing before she heard the bathroom door creak open. She snapped the laptop shut, forcing herself to breathe as Jason walked back into the room, a towel draped around his waist. He ran a hand through his damp hair, glancing at her with that same easy smile. "You're up early," he said casually. Emily returned the smile, her pulse pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "Couldn't sleep," she murmured. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he studied her, but he didn't press. Instead, he walked past her, grabbing his phone and checking his messages again. She had to get out. She had to find a way to leave without him suspecting. Breakfast passed in a blur. Jason was in a good mood, talking about plans for the day, suggesting they go snorkeling, maybe take another boat ride. He was still the same Jason on the surface, charming, thoughtful, completely in control. But now, Emily could see the cracks beneath the perfect exterior. She could see the way he maneuvered, the way he directed every part of their lives. She had ignored it before, thinking it was just confidence, just the way he was. But now she knew better. She needed an excuse to leave, to make a call, to find help. As they walked through the resort grounds, Emily forced herself to act normal, to laugh at his jokes, to hold his hand like nothing was wrong. But every step she took felt heavier, every breath harder to take. She spotted a small boutique shop near the edge of the property and turned to Jason with an easy smile. "I forgot to pick up souvenirs for Olivia," she said lightly. "Mind if I run in for a few minutes?" Jason hesitated. It was brief, just a flicker of hesitation in his expression, but she caught it. He didn't want her alone, but he couldn't say that. "Of course," he said smoothly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'll wait outside." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. She stepped into the shop, her hands shaking as she pulled her phone from her purse. This was her chance. She scrolled through her contacts, her mind racing. She needed someone who would take her seriously, someone who could help. Her father. She clicked his name, pressing the phone to her ear. 1 ring. 2. "Hello?" His voice was steady, familiar, grounding. Emily opened her mouth, but before she could speak, she caught something in the reflection of the glass display case in front of her. Jason. Standing just outside, watching her through the window. She couldn't say anything. Not now. Her throat tightened as she forced herself to stay calm. "Hey, Dad," she said, keeping her voice casual. "Just calling to say hi. The honeymoon's great." Jason's expression remained unreadable, his eyes fixed on her through the glass. She ended the call quickly, slipping the phone back into her purse. She had been right. He didn't trust her. And now she knew for certain. If she made one wrong move, she wouldn't get another chance. Emily stepped out of the shop with a forced smile, clutching a small bag of trinkets she had hastily grabbed off a shelf. Jason stood exactly where he had been moments ago, his posture relaxed, hands in the pockets of his tailored linen pants, but his eyes, his sharp, calculating eyes, were watching her too closely. She felt the weight of his scrutiny like a physical pressure against her skin. He had been waiting, observing. He knew. Not everything, not yet, but he had sensed something. She returned his gaze with a carefully neutral expression, forcing herself to exhale slowly. If she let her nerves show, if she let even a flicker of her real fear slip through, she had no doubt he would see it. "Find something good?" he asked, his voice smooth, effortlessly casual. She lifted the bag slightly, feigning amusement. "Just a few things for Olivia. Thought I'd surprise her." Jason smiled, leaning in to kiss her forehead. She let him. His lips were warm against her skin, but all she felt was ice. "She'll love that," he murmured before slipping his arm around her waist. "Ready to head back?" She nodded. There was no choice. The walk through the resort felt longer than before, as if the world had stretched every step a carefully measured performance. The beautiful island scenery, the soft golden sand, the clear blue waves, the palm trees swaying gently in the breeze, felt almost unreal now. It was as if the entire place was a mirage, a dream she had wandered into without realizing it was a trap. She had to keep moving. Jason kept the conversation light, talking about their plans for the rest of the trip, about how he wanted them to explore more of the island, maybe take a helicopter tour. He acted as though nothing had changed, as though he hadn't just spent the last several minutes watching her through a shop window, monitoring her every move. Emily played along. She laughed at the right moments, responded when necessary, kept her tone natural. Inside, she was screaming. By the time they reached their suite, the exhaustion in her bones felt unbearable. Not the kind that came from walking or traveling, but the kind that came from carrying the weight of fear, from knowing that every second counted. Jason poured himself a drink from the minibar, glancing at her over his shoulder. "You okay?" Emily forced herself to nod. "Just tired. It's been a long day." His eyes lingered on her for a moment before he nodded, satisfied. "Get some rest then. I'll take care of a few emails." She turned away, moving toward the bedroom, but she felt his gaze on her the entire way. The moment she was alone, she sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the sheets, her mind racing. She needed to figure out her next move. She had evidence now, at least enough to know Jason wasn't who he said he was. But she had to be smart. If she made the wrong move, if she acted too soon, she had no idea how he would react. And that was the most terrifying part. Because the man she had married wasn't just a liar. He was a strategist. And she was now part of whatever game he was playing. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. She needed to get to her father. That was her best option. He had connections, resources. If anyone could help her navigate this situation, it was him. But how? Jason would never let her leave alone now. That much was clear. He was watching her too closely. He had suspected something the moment she had stepped into that shop. The call to her father had been a mistake, no matter how casual she had tried to make it. There was only one option left. She had to pretend everything was fine, for as long as it took. That night, she lay beside Jason as he slept, her body still, her breathing even, every muscle in her body tense with awareness. She needed to survive this. She needed to be careful, because Jason wasn't just playing a role anymore. He knew she was hiding something. And now, the real game had begun. Emily woke with the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. The moment her eyes opened, reality settled in like a thick, suffocating fog. She was lying in bed next to a man who had lied to her, manipulated her, and possibly even married her for a reason far more sinister than love. Jason, or rather Jordan Daniels, slept peacefully beside her, his arm draped over her waist as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Her heartbeat was steady, but only because she had spent all night preparing herself for what came next. She needed to leave. She needed to reach her father. And most importantly, she needed to do it without Jason realizing what she was planning. She forced herself to stay still, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. Slow, even, still deep in sleep. Carefully, she slid out from under his arm, pausing when he stirred. Her breath hitched, but his breathing evened out again, his body sinking back into the sheets. She exhaled silently before easing herself onto the floor, her feet pressing against the cool hardwood as she moved toward her suitcase. The plan was simple. Pack a small bag, something light enough to carry. Take her passport, her phone, any cash she could find. Then she would tell Jason she was going for a massage at the resort spa, something perfectly normal for a honeymoon. She would walk to the spa, where she would act as if she had an appointment. But instead of checking in, she would slip out through the employee entrance she had noticed near the back of the building, where staff members took deliveries. From there, she would take a taxi straight to the airport. She had already checked flights. There was one leaving in 2 hours, heading straight back to New York. It wasn't perfect, but it was her best shot. If she played this carefully, if she kept up the act for just a little longer, she could be on that flight before Jason even realized she was gone. She zipped up her bag as quietly as possible, keeping her movements deliberate and controlled. When she turned back toward the bed, Jason was still asleep, one arm now stretched toward her side of the bed, his face relaxed. She swallowed, ignoring the brief sting of something she couldn't name. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. That man had never existed. Taking one last breath, she steeled herself and walked towards the door. The resort was quiet in the early morning light, the air thick with the scent of salt and tropical flowers. She kept her steps even, her head held high, resisting the urge to look around too often. The last thing she needed was to draw attention to herself. When she reached the spa, she stepped inside, greeting the woman at the front desk with an easy smile. "Hi, I have a massage appointment under Emily Davis," she said, her voice steady. The receptionist checked the screen, then frowned slightly. "I don't see anything booked under that name," she said. Emily's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Oh, really? That's strange. My husband must have forgotten to confirm it. No worries. I'll just wait here for a bit and see if anything opens up." The receptionist smiled politely. "Of course. Feel free to relax in the lounge. We'll let you know if there's an opening." Emily nodded, stepping away from the desk and into the waiting area. But she didn't sit. Instead, she casually walked toward the back hallway where she had seen employees coming in and out the day before. Every step felt heavier, her stomach tightening as she neared the exit. She reached for the handle, and then she heard the voice behind her. "Emily." Her blood turned to ice. She turned slowly, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Jason stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emily's mind raced. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to still be sleeping in the suite, unaware of her plan. But he wasn't. He had followed her. She forced a smile. "Jason, what are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I woke up, and you were gone," he said finally. "You didn't mention a spa appointment last night." Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, but she kept her voice light. "I didn't think it was important. I just wanted a quiet morning." Jason's eyes flickered toward the back hallway. She saw the moment he put the pieces together. The silence stretched. Then he smiled. "Of course," he said smoothly. "That makes sense." Emily forced herself to relax, to exhale as if nothing was wrong. "I should probably go back up, though. There's no availability anyway." She took a step forward, but Jason shifted slightly, blocking her path. "Let's walk together," he said, his tone easy but firm. "We can grab breakfast on the way back." Emily nodded slowly, knowing there was no way to refuse. She had lost her window. The walk back to the suite was unbearable. Jason kept up an effortless conversation, but Emily could feel the weight of his suspicion in every glance he threw her way. She had failed. She had no way out. But as she stepped back into their suite, she knew one thing for certain. Jason knew she had tried to leave. And now she had to be more careful than ever. The air inside the suite felt heavier than before, pressing against Emily's chest like a silent warning. Jason let the door shut behind them, the soft click of the lock echoing louder than it should have. She kept her back straight, moving toward the center of the room with careful steps, as if any sudden movement might set something off. She needed to think, to calculate her next move, but all she could focus on was the unshakable certainty that Jason knew. He knew she had tried to leave. She could see it in his eyes, the way they lingered on her too long, the way his expression remained unnervingly calm, too controlled. Jason had always been smooth, charming, but now she could feel the shift, the tension simmering just beneath the surface. He had followed her for a reason. He had waited outside that shop. He had come to the spa. He was watching her. Emily kept her movements natural, setting down her small shopping bag on the table near the window. She felt Jason's presence behind her, not too close, but near enough that she was acutely aware of his every breath, his every movement. The silence between them stretched thin. "You've been quiet this morning," Jason finally said, his voice smooth, careful. Emily turned, forcing herself to meet his gaze. She managed a small smile, the kind that had always worked before, the kind that made her look soft, innocent, easy to believe, just tired. The wedding, the traveling, everything. It's been a lot. Jason studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. "Yeah, I get that." He walked toward the bar cart, pouring himself a glass of water. Emily watched the way his fingers curled around the glass, steady, unhurried. Everything about him was deliberate. He was giving her room to speak, to slip up. He wanted to see what she would say next. She knew she had to tread carefully. She sat down on the couch, crossing her legs, keeping her posture relaxed. "I didn't think you'd wake up so early," she said casually. "I didn't want to disturb you, so I figured I'd get out for a bit." Jason took a sip of his water, his eyes never leaving hers. "That makes sense. But the spa? That's not really your thing." Her stomach twisted. He was testing her. She let out a soft laugh, shrugging. "I don't know. I thought I'd try something different. A little self-care after all the stress. But I didn't even book anything, so I guess it doesn't matter now." Jason tilted his head slightly, as if considering something. Then he walked over and sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, but not close enough to touch. "You seemed a little off yesterday, too," he said, his tone light but pointed. "Is everything okay?" Emily felt her pulse quicken, but she didn't let it show. She turned toward him, her expression carefully arranged into something soft, something trusting. "Of course," she said. "I think I'm just overwhelmed. It's a lot, you know. Getting married, all of this. It's just hitting me now." Jason watched her, his gaze unwavering. Then, after a long pause, he reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You know, you can talk to me about anything, right?" he said. Emily's skin crawled under his touch, but she nodded, holding his gaze. "I know." The tension in the room didn't ease. If anything, it grew stronger, thicker, curling around them like smoke. Jason finally stood, stretching slightly, his demeanor shifting back to something more casual, more effortless. "Why don't we have a relaxing day then? Just the two of us. No plans, no rushing. We can order room service, watch the waves, maybe even take a nap." Emily smiled, but inside she was screaming. He wanted her here, close, where he could watch her. She nodded, keeping her voice even. "That sounds nice." But she knew now. She wasn't getting out that easily. The rest of the day passed in an eerie sort of normalcy. Jason kept close, always near but never too suffocating. He let her relax, let her feel as though nothing had changed. They ate lunch on the balcony, drank champagne, laughed about old memories. But it was all an illusion. Every word, every glance was carefully placed, a performance meant to keep them both exactly where they needed to be. By the time evening came, Emily felt exhausted from keeping up the act. She excused herself to take a bath, locking the door behind her before sinking into the warm water. She let her head rest against the edge of the tub, staring at the ceiling, her mind running in circles. She needed to try again. Jason wasn't going to let her leave easily, but that didn't mean she couldn't find another way. She had made her first mistake by acting too soon, by being too obvious. But now she knew what she was up against. She had to be smarter. She had to wait. And when the moment came, when he let his guard down, she would be ready. That night, as they lay in bed, Jason pulled her close, his arm draped over her waist, his breathing steady against the back of her neck. To anyone else, it would have looked like a perfect moment, the picture of intimacy between newlyweds. But Emily knew the truth. This wasn't love. This was a cage. And she was running out of time to find the key. Emily lay awake long after Jason's breathing had evened out beside her, staring at the ceiling while her mind raced through every possible scenario. She had failed in her first attempt to leave, and now Jason was watching her more closely than ever. But that didn't mean she was out of options. If anything, she was more determined than before. She just had to be patient, careful, precise. She knew Jason was playing a game, pretending as if nothing had changed while subtly keeping her in check. He never asked her outright if she had tried to leave, never accused her of anything, but his presence loomed over her at every moment. She wasn't allowed to slip away again. He made sure of it. But he didn't know everything. Emily had learned from her mistake at the spa. She had been reckless, acting too soon without a clear plan. But this time, she had one. She had seen the way he carried himself, the way he responded to change. Jason was careful, but he had routines, and she had been watching. Every morning, he checked his emails. Every afternoon, he made a call from the balcony, pacing as he spoke, thinking she wasn't paying attention. And every evening, he went down to the lobby bar for a drink before bed. That was the moment she had been waiting for. She kept her movements slow and natural as she turned on her side, feeling Jason's warmth against her back. He had one arm draped over her, his breathing steady. She closed her eyes and matched her own breathing to his, willing herself to stay calm. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, she felt him shift beside her, carefully extracting his arm as he sat up. She listened as he moved to the bathroom, the quiet sound of the faucet running, then the soft rustling as he dressed. A familiar pattern, the one he followed every night. Then the door clicked shut. Emily exhaled slowly, waiting, counting in her head. 30 seconds. A minute. 2. Then she moved. She threw off the blankets, slipping out of bed and grabbing her phone from the nightstand. She didn't stop to think as she opened her messages and typed quickly, her fingers shaking. He knows. I need help. Room 806. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before hitting send. Then she deleted the message. She moved swiftly to the suitcase near the closet, pulling out a sweater, slipping it over her nightdress. Every movement was deliberate, quiet. She had to be out before Jason came back. She reached for the door, her hand on the handle. And then her phone buzzed. Her breath caught as she glanced down. A response. Stay where you are. Don't let him know. We're on our way. A rush of relief surged through her, but she tamped it down quickly. She wasn't safe yet. She moved back to the bed, her heart hammering in her chest, forcing herself to sit, to look natural. She barely had time to settle before she heard footsteps approaching. The door opened. Jason stepped inside, the scent of whiskey clinging to him, his expression unreadable. You're still awake, he said, closing the door behind him. Emily shrugged, forcing herself to look tired. Couldn't sleep. Jason studied her for a long moment before nodding. I'll make us some tea. She watched as he moved towards the small kitchenette, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket she had draped over herself. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, a knock at the door. Jason's body stiffened. Emily's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Jason turned slowly, setting down the tea kettle. His expression was perfectly neutral, but she could see the flicker of tension in his eyes. Are you expecting someone? He asked. Emily swallowed. No. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Jason's gaze flickered to her, then to the door. For the first time since she had discovered the truth, she saw it. The calculation, the weighing of options. Jason wasn't just a man who had been caught. He was a man who was deciding what to do about it. He took a slow step forward, then another. Emily's throat tightened. Then the door burst open. The next few seconds blurred together in a rush of movement. Men in dark suits swarmed into the room, weapons raised, voices sharp and commanding. Jason didn't move at first, his hands lifting slightly in a gesture of surrender, his expression as calm as ever. But Emily saw it. The tightening of his jaw, the flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. He was assessing, calculating. Then, as if deciding against whatever he had been considering, he exhaled slowly and let the agents grab his wrists, forcing them behind his back. Jason Davis, one of the agents said, or should I say Jordan Daniels. You're under arrest for multiple counts of financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Jason didn't resist. He barely reacted at all. Emily sat frozen on the bed, unable to move, unable to breathe. Jason turned his head slightly, just enough to look at her. For a moment, she thought he might say something. Then he smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. And then they took him away. The room felt too large after he was gone. The silence rang in her ears, deafening. Someone was speaking to her, asking her if she was okay, but the words felt distant. Her body felt numb, her mind unable to process what had just happened. Jason was gone. The nightmare was over. But as she sat there, staring at the empty space where he had stood, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Check out more videos on the channel. You might find something interesting. And if you found this video helpful, feel free to share it with others. Thanks for watching.